Ladies and gentlemen, I just got back from seeing Evil Dead Rise in the theaters. This is, of course, the brand new Evil Dead film, which we haven't had one in over 10 years. So it was a long time coming. Personally, for me, I haven't seen this franchise until just recently. I watched the first one 2 years ago, and then I just watched the Evil Dead 2 Army of Darkness and the Evil Dead 2013 remake all within this past month. Reactions to those are all on the channel. The Evil Dead 2013 remake should be coming soon. So Evil Dead Rise I was looking forward to just because of that first trailer. I didn't really know much about the franchise, but that trailer grabbed me. It looked amazing and I got so excited. And Lee Cronin's not really a director I'm familiar with. I haven't seen any of his other work. So I was just like, okay, let's just see how this is. And it was one that I was very much anticipating, especially after watching the other Evil Dead movies. It got me even more excited. So going into this, I was expecting a lot. I was expecting a good movie. And what did we get? Let's get into it. We're going to talk about the positives, the negatives, then we'll give a rating out of 10, and then we'll go into spoilers at the end because there's a couple of spoiler things I want to talk about real quick. Starting off with the positives, I want to say I love that this movie keeps up with the same directing style as all of the other Evil Dead films. So obviously it's not the same as the Sam Raimi directing style, but it's close. There's a lot of shots and ways that he kind of used the camera in those original 3 movies that they stuck with even in this movie, not just in this one, also in the Evil Dead 2013 remake, but they do it in this one as well. And I love that consistency with how these movies feel in terms of their directing. I'm loving how they do that. They don't try to make it feel too different. Obviously, tonally, it's completely different than the original trilogy, but it still has the same sort of directing style. There's a lot of those lawnmower shots. There's a lot of the like diagonal kind of like moving up the camera. I don't know the words for it. I'm not, a film major, but I absolutely love stuff like that. The setting is really interesting and new. So obviously most of the other films took place in a cabin in the woods, other than of course Army of Darkness, which took place in medieval times. But this one decides to take place in an apartment complex, and I absolutely loved it because it affects the story completely. There's a lot of things in this movie that wouldn't be a problem if they lived in just like a normal house, but because they're in an apartment, there's a lot of new situations that happen because of it. There's a lot of cool scenes with the elevator as well. They show a couple of those things in the trailer, but what they do with the elevator, it's really cool. There's a couple different scenes with it that were awesome. The characters, although some of them I wasn't like too crazy about, I wasn't that interested in, there's a couple that I absolutely love, specifically the main character, whose name was Beth. I would consider her to be the main character. She was the sister of Ellie. Ellie is the mother that's in like all the promotional material for the movie. She's the one that's becoming possessed in the movie. She's the one you see in the trailer being possessed. And both of these characters, I love their dynamic as sisters. And even the kids, like I said, the kids aren't that interesting necessarily. They're not like bad characters. They're just kind of there to be the kids, really. And I love the family dynamic here because we haven't seen something like that in Evil Dead before, other than in the 2013 remake with the brother and sister. But for the most part, we don't really get to see like a family dynamic type thing going on. And I really like how it works in this movie, especially with having a kid involved. There's not usually kids involved in the Evil Dead movies. And I kind of like what they do with that concept towards the end of the film. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but there's a lot of interesting things they do with the, having a kid there. How different is the situation going to be when a kid is there? The movie's obviously very violent and very gory, and if that's the type of stuff you watch horror movies for, then you are definitely getting what you want in this movie because it delivers 100%. Completely. I mean, most of these movies have been pretty gory, and this one is just no different. It's one of the goriest movies I've seen in a while, and I loved how my whole audience was cringing and yelling out loud for a lot of different scenes in this movie. They don't go that far, not nearly as far as I feel like the 2013 remake goes, but it still does have a lot of scenes that really just make you just cringe. And yeah, it's wonderful. The practical effects are amazing as well. They clearly put a lot of work into it. They did not just try to cheap out with some cheap like CGI effects. A lot of it is actual practical work, and that just makes it all the more better. With these practical effects, they have a lot of cool body horror things as well. If you're a fan of body horror, like The Thing, for example, they do a lot of stuff like that here, and it's so good when they do that. It's just I can't help but love it. I would love to see how they actually put some of these things together, because it just blows my mind how they're able to make this look so real and tangible, even though it's obviously not. There's a lot of callbacks to the other Evil Dead films, which I'm not going to go into specifics as to what those are, because that could be seen as spoilers. But I do think the callbacks are pretty cool and they work well. And it just lets you know that, like, hey, this is part of the Evil Dead universe. It's not just some brand new thing. So keep that in mind. And I don't know, I thought it added a lot to the film. In terms of just being scary, I personally didn't think it was like that terrifying, but my audience clearly was terrified for a lot of it. I saw people crawling up in their seats, like jumping up and down. Like, you could tell people were terrified of a lot of different scenes in this film. And there's definitely some stuff like that that will get you. And yeah, that means they did their job, because it's a horror film. It's got to be scary. And yes, it was scary for a lot of moments. Now let's get into the negatives. So there's not many things I'm going to talk about in the negatives, if I'm going to be completely honest. There's really not much for me to say. But first of all, I want to talk about some of the character decisions. Now, it's kind of hard to talk about character decisions being such a negative in a movie like this, because it's not like Scream, where it's just a killer with a knife. Like, it's a lot easier to like talk shit about someone when it's like that situation. Like in Scream, for example, I talked a lot about in Scream 6 characters making dumb decisions and how annoying it can be as a viewer. And that's just a guy with a knife, right? Yeah, that's scary, sure, but it's more reasonable for someone to make stupid decisions when they're being chased by literal demons, being possessed, like their own mother possessed. It's a lot more common someone's going to be making dumb decisions with that compared to being chased by a guy with a knife. You know what I mean? So they're both, you know, life-threatening situations, but one of them is like otherworldly type stuff, you know? So when you see these characters doing these things, it's just like, it makes a little bit more sense that you have characters doing things that just don't seem reasonable, because I mean, they're probably in shock, you know what I mean? Like, there isn't much you can do. It's not like it's common sense of how to fix the situation, because it's literal possessed people. Like, it's your family possessed. It's not easy to deal with. So I want to say it's a negative, because yes, it did bother me in some scenes, but at the same time, it's like, what else could they have done, really? You know what I mean? Obviously, they're probably going to end up in this situation anyways, regardless of them making the dumb decision or not. But that's the point. So why not just make the situation happen without them actually doing the dumb thing? You know what I mean? You can easily do that. There's some characters in this movie that I wanted to see more of, but they don't really do much with them. They're just kind of there for a little bit. And yeah, obviously it's a horror film. You're going to have characters come and go all the time. But there's just, I think they could have done more with some of the characters that were in this film, and they could have utilized them later down the line in a more interesting way. And the last negative I want to say, this is kind of a personal thing more than anything, but I thought it was just a little bit too much. Obviously, I love the violence and the gore. It works perfectly in a movie like this. But there's one type of gore that they kind of overdo in this movie, and it's usually one I'm okay with every now and then, but when you overdo it, it kind of gets a bit like redundant, and that's the like vomiting type gore, right? So they do that a couple times in this movie where the possessed like vomits, and then they do it again with vomiting blood, and then they do it again with more vomiting of other stuff, and it's so much vomiting gore in this movie. And personally, I just like that disgusts me more than anything. But I just feel like you didn't need to do it that much. You could have done it once, maybe twice, but they do it like almost 5 times. And I'm like, all right, we get it. We get it. I just don't want to see stuff coming out of people's mouths anymore. With that being said, let's give this movie a rating. I didn't have many negatives to say about it, so I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. It's not quite a 9. I think it could have been a 9 if they fixed some of the problems I talked about, but overall, it was certainly a home run for me in terms of what I was looking for from this franchise. I don't think it had to be much better for me to still really have a good time with it, and I'm glad it turned out the way it did. And talking about some spoilers, there's only a couple things I want to say necessarily. First of all, disappointed that Bruce Campbell didn't show up. That was something I was hoping. Like, he was in Evil Dead 2013 in the after credits, so I was hoping they would maybe do something like that. It didn't have to be some like Spider-Man No Way Home Avengers Endgame reveal where he comes out of a portal with his chainsaw. Although honestly, because of how ridiculous some of these movies are in this franchise, I would have completely been okay with that. Like, I would have been fine if he just came out of nowhere with a chainsaw. But I I do wish he showed up. It could have been the very end of the movie, maybe like the last scene, just like may have him appear and say something. I would have loved that. I think that would have been a nice little touch. Maybe they just couldn't get him. I don't know. Apparently he was an executive producer on it, so I'm sure he could have done something, but I don't know. I think that would have been cool. Missed opportunity. Another thing I want to talk about, absolutely loved the possessed characters coming together to form that giant monster at the end. The body horror on that was amazing, and the way they finish it off with throwing her in the tree, whatever you call that thing, I don't know, tree destroyer, what are they called? Wood chipper, that's what they're called. And just, that was beautiful. Beautiful scene, absolutely love that. The elevator with the blood filling up, the callbacks to the original with the branches, but instead of it being branches, it's wires in the elevator. That was awesome. I love the cheese grater. I loved so much the glass in the throat. There's so many scenes that were just so damn cool. I can't talk about it because I don't want to spoil it in the other section, but now we can talk about it here. And yes, I loved all of that shit. The eyeball scene where she bit out the eyeball, spit it into the guy's mouth, and he choked on it. That was a callback to Evil Dead 2. That was awesome. The Bruce Campbell and the voice recordings confirming that it is in the Evil Dead universe, the original Evil Dead universe. That was also cool. Having a chainsaw at the end there and the chainsaw going through the girl's head. So much cool stuff to this movie that I loved. There you go. That is my review for Evil Dead Rise. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. I'm going to be doing a ranking of all 5 Evil Dead movies really shortly, so definitely check that out. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see that. And if you haven't watched my reactions to the other Evil Dead movies, all of which are on my channel, there's definitely an Evil Dead playlist I believe I should have. So check out the Evil Dead playlist and you can find all of them there. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.